Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Barnyards and Backyards Live. I'm Jeff Edwards from University of Wyoming Extension. And Jeremiah Vardaman, my co-host, is here again with us today. Hello, Jeremiah.
Good morning.
And our guest today is Scott Cotton, and we're going to be talking about hay. Not hey you, but hay. Also with us today is Jenny Thompson. She will be running the show from the background. You may not see her, but you might hear her. Let's put it that way. For those of you who are new to Zoom or have forgotten, if you take your cursor and if you have comments or questions, you can go to the bottom of your screen and either type in the Q&A or in the chat box and ask questions, and we can bring those forward to Scott as he gives his presentation. And if you are watching us in Facebook Live, similar type of thing. If you enter comments in the comment area or questions, we can pull those forward into the presentation and get those to Scott. Last thing I'd like to say is that at the end of the program, we will ask you to fill out a survey, and links will be provided by either Jenny in the comment box or Jeremiah at some point in time. Probably a reminder at the end from Jeremiah. So I think with that, I think I got everything that time, didn't I?
We're ready to roll. Good. We're getting this down finally after 3 months.
Yeah, after 3 months, you know, it's a new habit. So Scott,
yes,
let's talk about actually if there's a little bit more that you'd like to introduce about yourself, you know, where you're located, and then provide a summary of what you're going to be providing, what information you're going to be providing us with today.
Be glad to. I'm Scott Cotton. I'm the area educator for agriculture for UW Extension in the center of the state. Also play a pretty active role in a lot of hay shows and hay judgings. And like these other two gentlemen, I've also been a hay producer for decades. So we kind of think we have a feel for this. We're going to talk to you today about hay in general, finding the good stuff to buy, and knowing what you get. So we're going to talk a little bit about evaluating hay, types of hay, the hay markets, what hay fits what species, and a number of other subjects, including some cautions. And then we're going to talk about simple things like hauling or not hauling. So we're glad to have you with Barnyards and Backyards today. We hope you please feel free to jump questions in. Most of the presentation was generated from questions that we get on a regular basis.
Perfect.
So you want me to jump into a screen here?
Yeah, why don't you share out your presentation? We'll get started, and I'll just be watching for those questions as they come in and bring them to you when I can, Scott.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yep.
Can you guys see this clear? So
yeah, we're good.
This is one of our hay fields, and one of the children we raising hay. It's always an idea to have an idea how hay is produced. So I guess my first question for anybody in the chat room or anybody online is, what's up with this hay? Is it good, or is it bad, or is it got a problem?
Well, it's got purple blooms on it.
It's got a lot of purple blooms on it. And
I would say that it's really short too.
Now that depends on your variety though, doesn't it, Jeff?
Well, and your season, right? And where you're at in the state.
It does. This, so just as a side note, this is actually fourth cutting, but it is gone to bloom too much. We like to keep alfalfa hay and some others at about a 10% bloom, because when they get too much bloom, two things happen. One, the protein starts going into the bloom instead of into the forage. And secondly, the blooms entice certain insects to drop their larvae there, and other insects that are problematic, like blister beetles and grasshoppers, go after the first set of insects, and you end up with problems in your hay. So an overview, Wyoming hay, whether you realize it or not, often ranks very high on a national contest and very high on the international contest. In fact, last year, the center of Wyoming, we had the #1 hay internationally and the #3 hay internationally from the center of the state. We have a lot of hay areas in Wyoming, but our primary hay areas are kind of focused around where there's water because we can grow more. And that means they're near rivers or related irrigation districts. But you will find hay almost everywhere in the state. It just varies what kind of hay. Even out in the middle of the dry hills, you'll find meadows with hay in it. With that being said, buying hay is kind of like buying cars. Doing your homework is kind of essential. You don't want to think you're going out to buy a four-wheel drive truck and find out you have a Volkswagen. So types of hay. A lot of people would look at this photograph and say, this is horse hay, and it is, but that horse is almost 18 hands high. That smooth brome right there is about 4 foot tall. Is that better, Jeff? A little taller hay?
A little taller hay.
Yeah.
How many cuttings are you going to get off that one, though?
I used to get 3 off of those down in it, but that was that meadow. It's sub-irrigated.
Wow.
So we have legume hay. I never had to irrigate that. We have legume hay, which is commonly alfalfa, sandpoint, and things like birdfoot, trefoil. And those legumes are things that usually fix nitrogen on their own. So you don't have to put a lot of nitrogen on them. Then we have grass hay, a couple of examples, orchard grass, brome grasses, timothy. We have annual hay that you'll see on the market like oat hay, barley, some canexes, a variety of things that are one season hays that pop up from time to time if people are trying to do a rotation on a field. They'll stick in something to get a crop. And then we have mixed hay, and mixed hay could be any percentage of all of these above or almost none of all of these above. And we have criteria for mixed hay. Most of the time it's grass alfalfa, and if it's over 50% alfalfa at contest, we consider it alfalfa hay. If it's under 50%, we consider it mixed hay, or if it's only like 20% alfalfa, it's still considered mixed hay. So you might have mixed hay that runs from 50-50 to 80-10 or 80-20. When you get into a contest, if there's any alfalfa in it at all, we consider it mixed hay.
Hey, Scott, what's the benefit to having that mixed hay? Why do we want to see that or potentially could see that? What's it do for the hay?
Well, a couple of things. One, it doesn't take as much water. Two, it gets sometimes more erect and easier to hay. And 3, you'll see people that want to graze it, or they want to feed it to a species that doesn't need really hot hay or strong, powerful hay like alfalfa when it's pure. We'll talk a little bit about species needs later, but a lot of the time what we'll see is people will put in a grass stand as a nurse crop. That's usually an annual, like oats, and that helps shelter the new alfalfa when they plant it. But then we'll see grass alfalfa mixes that are like orchard grass, smooth brome or meadow brome, or even a bird's foot trefoil mix in there. And sometimes it's really so that you can put a grass in that catches late season moisture and still gives you the third cutting in an arid area. So there's a variety of reasons.
And you also see a little bit of a quality bump in that hay as well above a straight grass hay.
Oh, definitely. Legume hays tend to be higher relative feed value and a higher protein, but they also require more management and more fertilization to stay viable. So some social references. You'll hear things talked about. I'm going to put all these up here. People will say, well, I bought dairy quality hay. And that usually is a really good quality hay, tends to be alfalfa. Horse hay is hay that has a good enough protein content. On one side that it's got a lot of nutrients. The other side of horse hay may be a comment that it's horse hay simply because it's clean, like Timothy hay. And it's easy to hay, doesn't have a lot of debris in it. It's easy to stack, it doesn't fall apart. There's trade-offs with horse hay, and this is the reason it's just a social reference. A good Timothy horse hay, really easy to bale. I love swathing Timothy. The downside is Timothy, even though it looks green, has good sugar, and the horses love the taste, tends to drop off to about 3 to 5% protein if it's cured out, and that's not a lot of nutrients. They'll have tendency to need some supplements. Cow hay usually is a reference to things that are a little lower quality hay, just something you could feed to the old cows. But it varies based on the needs of the cows. And then the next line there is there's a lot of creative terms for trash hay, but this is kind of it. One person earlier mentioned goat hay, and I guess you could say that, but it could simply be hay that you find is really low in quality, or something that's 3 years old that's really weathered, but it's the only thing you can find. Then there's cuttings on hay. The better of hay production area you have, the more cuttings. Along the big river valleys, you may find as 1 to 6 cuttings. If you're up at high altitude, like Albany County, where I lived for years, you'll find that they get 1 cutting between the last week of August and the first 10 days of September, and that's about it. The reality is most irrigated producers get 1, 2, or 3, and if they have a really good season or they crop it fairly rapidly and they have a good system, they may get 4 or 5 cuttings. So the differences in quality, stem ratio, the cellulose levels, and the protein varies with qualities with the cuttings. So it's important to learn that. We could do a seminar just on the cuttings, but first cutting tends to be low on leaf, small stems, very, very edible. Second and third cutting tend to be your quality cuttings with good stems. As you get into third, some of the stems will get thicker, but the leaves on second and third are usually pretty good. Fourth and fifth cuttings, it depends, but fifth cuttings, if you're going into fall, sometimes you'll see the digestibility drop off even if the leaves are there. Then there's rain hay, or rain and snow hay, been exposed to the weather. It doesn't mean necessarily that you can't use it, but it's important to evaluate it for a loss of nutrients and check it out. If it's weathered and it's only the top 2 inches, you probably still have a lot of good hay. The key factor years ago was to hire stackers that knew how to tie a stack nice and tight, so only the top tier or 2 got weathered, the rest of them stayed good.
Well, and on that rain hay, Scott, it depends on where it was in the process when it got rained on, right? So
that too. In fact, there's an old line in irrigated hay producers: if it's in the window and it's black, pack it up and destroy it because you won't be able to use it. We tend to get mold if it gets rained on, and then even if it dries out fast, you have to go out and turn it. It makes more labor. If it turns and you see a black dust coming up, if you buy hay and you open it up and you see black dust coming out of it, evaluate the hay before you buy it, because it has a tendency to be detrimental to the health of animals. It gets in their lungs. It's not good nutrients. And it happens from time to time to almost all producers. They work against it, but it happens.
Yeah, once you start knocking hay down, that's when the thunderclouds build up and come hit you or something.
Absolutely. Same thing with hailstorms. I mean, you can have a beautiful stand of hay and a hailstorm comes through and just leaves your stems standing and all the leaves are on the ground. That hay really is just straw in some ways, and that's the price you get out of it. I put coastal hay in here because sometimes when things are tough, you'll import hay from other areas. We did this a couple of years during droughts, brought in coastal hay, and when it got in here, we found it was inland salt grass, almost no quality, very alkaline, high salt levels, and be careful what you order in if you order in from out of state. We always recommend that you go look at the hay before you commit to it and buy it, and then stay in touch. Highway hay, the highways contract hay removal in 10-mile stretches. Some producers do that. We did it for years. On good years, you can pick up some great hay. On bad years, you'll see producers going out there and getting the hay because they know they're going to be short. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, sometimes it has interesting surprises in it that they picked up while they were going along the roadway. Get to know your hay producers. It's like anything, like buying a used car. If you're buying something from somebody you know and trust, and you know they're looking for the right product for you, it's important to build that relationship. Their livelihood depends on it often as not. They invest heavily I don't know about the other educators online with me today, but on the average, just to put up 200 acres of hay every year in 5-6 cuttings, we had about $1.6 million in used equipment. So they work about 100 to 200 hours a week when the time is right. But if you talk to them and you tell them what they want, often as not, if they have you as a confirmed client, they'll kind of tweak their production and grow stuff just for you. They do prefer to sell bulk, so it always helps you to figure on buying bulk. But there are producers that will hold the hay for you on site and let you pay for it and then come get your hay when you need it. But with all hay production, things happen. Irrigation system goes down, drought comes through, a wildfire comes through, insects come in and prey on your hay crop. Your swather breaks down for an extra 5 days and you see that extra bloom like you do in the first picture that we showed you. That was due to two things, a county fair and a swather breakdown. So be kind to your producers and they'll be good to you. Get to know the ones that have what you're looking for, whether it's grass hay or legume hay, and stay with them if the product's good.
Well, and I think that's a big point there, is just building a relationship. That's been some of the best things I've seen anyway in my personal time, and just developing a relationship with that person or persons that you purchase hay from, and you find a consistent source and you know how they put it up, and you can almost guarantee a certain quality or certain take from them, and they'll let you know. They know what you want, you know what they can produce, and there's a good communication once you develop those relationships.
And often as not, if they know you're going to be a consistent client, they'll give you a price break.
Yeah.
And on top of that, if they're going to be short of hay, they'll tell you, I need to know what you need early because, man, the fields aren't doing good this year. So here's what I'm going to do. And here's when it'll be ready. And it lets you plan things out too.
Well, yeah. And if you're that consistent customer that comes back year after year, especially if you buy in bulk, they'll be like, well, we're going to serve you first before we serve other people. And so in those short hay years, you might get hay where others won't. So yeah, it really plays a part.
And word of mouth is great marketing too. If other people that want hay are looking for it and they talk to you and like what you're feeding, they're going to start wanting to build that relationship too. And it's really valuable. So let's talk a little bit about evaluating or judging hay. We're going to go over the same criteria that we used in the Colorado State Fair, the Wyoming State Fair, and the Nebraska State Fair, and a lot of county fairs. And it's a good basic regimen to use when you're looking at hay before you say, yes, I'll take that much of that hay at that price. It's a good idea to go and look at it. So most producers are fairly comfortable with you saying, hey, I'd like to come look at it when you get it baled, and then we can talk. They'd rather you know what you're getting, and they know what they're selling, and they know what they're going to get for it. They will hold you to it, but at the same time, it's important. So color is the first thing that people recognize, and the picture on the right-hand side is a mixed grass alfalfa field, but it's mostly grass. Pretty good color. Color varies with how long we let the hay dry out or how mature it is before we harvest it. But good hay, if you know it's alfalfa, it should have a dark green color. If it's a number of variety of grasses, the color may vary, be a little less green, but it could be extremely good color for that species. So it's one more reason to get to know the hay that you're looking for. Then smell. You pick up a hay or a chunk out of a bale or even a chunk off the field. And don't forget that mold thing we talked about. That's part of the color too. If you see black hay, it's not a good thing. So smell, Jeff, what do you smell for when you test hay?
I don't know. Nice. To me, it smells green, not rotten. Doesn't smell like molasses, doesn't smell burnt, those types of things.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you pick it up and it smells like it's fermenting whiskey, we're probably on the wrong track, right? If it smells like molasses and you see chunks of what looks like molasses in it, they probably ran it through a baler when it was too wet and it caramelized. If it smells musty or dirty or smells like something else, you might look around to see what's in the hay. It's a good thing to like the smell of it. It should smell like hay. And if you've been buying hay for a while, you know what good hay smells like. If you have allergies, make sure you've got your antihistamine ready, but you should smell it anyway. So the next item is mold and moisture. I mean, the newer inline balers allow us to bale things and lose less leaf at a lower moisture, maybe 11 to 15%. And the old balers, you're always looking at that 13 to 18% thing. You'll hear ranchers and farmers talk about, I laid out there waiting for the moisture to come in the mornings until it was right to bale. And that's what they're talking about. To make it bale right, they needed that 15%. They get too much, it starts doing weird things. They get too little, it loses a lot of leaf. And we want to avoid the mold and still have a little bit of moisture. Now, when it gets in the bale, the moisture dries out, but it should still have some flex to the stems. They shouldn't snap like dried toothpicks. They should bend a little before they snap, and that's internal moisture. Leaf retention is important. The nutrients are mostly in the leaf. So if you're buying hay and you pull some open and there's a lot of leaves attached to the stem, that's a good sign. The more, the better. If you shake out a bale and you pick a bale up and it looks like half the leaves dropped on the ground, then they was probably baled it pretty hot, dry and hot. And that's not always good. They don't always have a choice, but hopefully your producer is working to save as much leaf because the hay tastes better when it's there.
Scott, I have a rabbit hole question for you.
Sure.
Do you know anybody in the state who's operating one of those steamer conditioners as they bale? Do you know if there's anybody doing that?
Actually, I don't in this state. I know some just across the border in Nebraska.
Okay.
That do it. They run a moisture inject on the back end of or an intake of their baler.
Well, and there's actually a second piece of equipment that rides between the tractor and the baler that is a steam conditioner that's relatively new, and I just didn't know if anybody in the state had been running any of that.
The ones I have seen, actually mount on the front of the baler.
Okay.
They're either a spray moisture or a steamer, and what they're trying to do is make sure the leaf stays on the hay. And
Jeremiah, have you seen that?
I have seen what you're talking about. I've not seen it in the state of Wyoming being operated. I saw it at a show. Okay. You're talking about the steamed equipment, but I'm like Scott. That's what I've seen is on the front. It mounts and it's just tanks of water that sprays some water in, and I've seen it only on large square balers.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I've actually seen one that was manufactured at home on a traditional small baler, but there's a side note to that. We'll also once in a while, and this is one reason you should get to know your producers. We've seen a few limited producers, and I say very, very limited, that will inject moisture that has dye in it on the intake of the baler, and that in some circles, including
keeping it green, huh?
Yeah, in my circles, that's considered a little unethical. But you can have some of those guys who crank out the most beautiful green hay, but when you crack the stems, the green isn't on the inside. So you want to look at it. But most producers don't bother with that, and they'd rather produce well, harvest it at the right time, and that's the people we usually deal with. So along those lines, stem to leaf ratio, when we judge stuff, we'll open up a bale, and I'll show you an example here in just a second. We open up a bale and we look at it, and if it's got good retention, and yet one stem with 10 leaves is a lot better than one stem with 5 leaves. That's all there is to it. If it's grass hay, that the leaves should be bound up in there all along the stem of the grass so that you get the protein and nutrients from that hay. So stem to leaf ratio is good. If you open up a bale and it's bare stems, that's not good. Something's happening, and usually the producers will work with you on the price.
Or if the stems are really big and coarse and the leaves are really small and thin. I mean, the bigger, the wider, the longer, especially on grass leaves is what I'm talking about. That's just better. Yep.
Yeah, there's some exceptions. I mean, normally with hay, we like the spaghetti approach, the nice thin stuff. It's easily digestible. There's some exceptions with oat straw and with canex and stuff, but those stems are big and wide, but they're really thin and shallow. They Yeah, they're hollow.
So what you're saying, Scott, on the spaghetti approach, you're looking for angel hair instead of fettuccine, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And let me rephrase that. Not me so much, but my cattle are
Yeah.
looking for that. And horses look for that too. In fact, I've got some old geldings you fill up a feed bunk and they'll use their nose and weed through it till they find those parts they really want. And that's usually what it is. It's those fine stem things.
And we talk about, or you're talking about alfalfa, but not all alfalfa is the same either, right? Some of the newer alfalfa has lower lignin content, so it's not as chewy, I guess.
Yeah, it doesn't form as much lignin or cellulose and hemicellulose. And a side note, we have at this time about 300 varieties of alfalfa out there on the market. We have some that we find are better for arid states like ours to produce. Mm-hmm. And you can always check on with your local extension office to what the common varieties are going around here, or they can refer you to some of the seed dealers. And you can talk to, man, you walk into a farmer, start talking varieties, and they're automatically going to assume you know what you're talking about first. And they're going to deal with you as a peer rather than just somebody that's walking in off of a suburb or something.
Right.
So
right.
It goes back to that buying cars thing. Know what you're buying. If you're buying two different pickups, one has a turbo diesel in it and one has a 306 cylinder in it, they're not going to perform the same. So
Jeremiah knows that. He's had two pickups that haven't been performing very well.
Yeah, it's been a little rough lately.
That kind of leads in.
Please continue.
That kind of leads into the discussions of weeds and poisonous plants, doesn't it? I mean, look for those in a bale. If you have to go to a producer and just buy one bale, do it just to assess the hay. And you want to find weeds. There's some weeds that are poisonous, but the more weeds in something, usually it indicates he's either got a problem in his hay field or he's not paying attention. And we actually have had imported hay that people bought from other states during droughts. They came in with poisonous plants and we lost animals when they fed it in the winter. And we can get you more information. There's more information on the Barnyards and Backyards website about poisonous plants. And it's important to evaluate your hay. Spread it out and take a look at it. And then if it looks clean, you can always wrap it up and feed it to something.
Well, and this goes right along on your point. Go look at that hay, right? Because just because it's a weed, if you just look at the forage analysis, the weeds will actually put higher crude protein, depending on what the weed is. But some of those weeds can have high crude protein content in them and that in their leaves. And so on a hay evaluation, if you just look at the analysis, you won't know that weed's in there. It doesn't flag it. It doesn't come up. And so it's real important to go look at that physically and try and identify those different plants within it.
It really is, and look for foreign material too. I mean, we've seen when we have disasters, we've seen a lot of stuff washed into hay fields because they're low and level. Everything from dirt to manure to debris from upstream. And if you're buying highway hay, I used to work with a producer that said, if you're going to buy highway hay, make sure it's highway hay where the 4-H kids went through and cleaned those borrow ditches as a project before it was hayed. Because you can find everything from cigarette butts to car parts to plastic bags to beer cans to bottles and stuff like that. But it's a good idea to look at your hay anyway. Every year in dry country, especially southeast Montana and southeast Colorado, we'll bale up a few rattlers. And it's kind of surprising when you roll a bale over and there's a snake baled up in it. So bull snakes I'm not too concerned about. Consider that added protein for some of the old bulls, but that's just humor there. I'm not being serious. But it isn't unusual to go out in a big field of round bales before they stack them and find something baled up in one of the bales. So take a look at your bales, walk through the stack, look down the stack and check it out.
Well, and it can be something just like rocks, wire, right?
Yeah.
I mean, anything and everything can kind of be in that bale, and the cleaner the field, the better and less foreign material is going to be in there. But just keep an eye out for it. You never know.
If they're accidentally, they got hydraulic problems or something with their header, it could be running low and picking up all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
We did have one young man we hired that tried to bale half of my hay corral once, but that didn't work out too well. But hey, swathers can be repaired. So fence post, chunks of wire, as Jeremiah said, anything could be in there, and you don't want to be feeding it. Overall, evaluating and judging hay, you want to look for uniformity. You want to look for uniform bales, uniform color, uniform quality. If you look at somebody's stack that you're considering buying some from, and it all looks consistent, then that's the step number one. You're looking in a good direction because there's a consistency in how to put it up. The second thing is, if you see difference in the stack, ask why. Some of it may have been in the field for an extra day because of something. Some of it may be last year's hay, and you can negotiate a different price.
Or different cuttings, right?
Yeah, or different cuttings.
Or different plants. So one field might be alfalfa, another one's grass. So you can see a difference.
Or a mixture. I mean, we see that often. You'll see two different mixtures of grass. One is 50-50 and one is 60-40, and it makes a big difference in what you're buying. So you'll see it in the color and the consistency, and then you can ask.
But you don't need to know. It'll stand out to you. You'll be like, why is that different? And just ask. You don't have to know why the difference is, but just ask that question.
And that kind of leads into a conversation that we'll talk about hauling later. If you're having somebody else go get your hay, select your hay, and haul it for you, you get what they selected. So it never hurts to go out and do your homework first. So I'm going to stop my share for a minute and show you guys a couple different hays, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So this hay, I'll stand up here. This hay is a pretty good alfalfa. It's been stored for a year. You can see where the leaves are still in it. It has a grass mixture in it. It's pretty decent alfalfa. It was bright green when I picked it out of the stack and brought it into a pan. And it's a pretty quality hay. It's not something I'd worry about too much. And the second hay I've got.
Versus the second one you're going to show us, right?
Well, and there's a catch-22. You can see this is a different color, right?
Yep.
Now, this is actually very, very good hay. The difference is what, Jeremiah? Can you
Looks
see
like
that?
An annual hay to me.
It is an annual hay. Good
Correct.
job. Good job. This is oat hay. So it's went a little past where it should have when they built it, but it has
got a lot of leaf tissue.
Has a lot of grain in it, and it has a lot of leaf. It's going to have a lower nutrient value than the other one, but it's still a great hay for something like horses and stuff like that. So you got to pick what you want. And boy, I'm making a mess out of my desk. That's part of the game.
Part of hay, right?
Part of the hay, yeah. All I need is one of your goats, and we can move forward, right?
There you go.
Let them
Let's clean that right up, and all your sticky notes and pens.
Yeah. So no, the big bottom line is know what hay you're looking at. You can go buy second year hay that looks a little yellowed on top, and when you open the bale, it's still very, very good hay, and you can get it at a discount. But the big thing is, if you go out there and you don't know what you're looking at, I give you, for instance, I picked up some a good last year's cutting alfalfa and grass mix. There was 175 relative feed value at an auction in one of the counties here because the lady didn't think it was very good hay because it had yellow on the outside. It was second cutting mixed hay, last year's. I got it for $2 a bale. It was only
price.
It was only 100 bales, but she thought it was shot because it was last year's hay. Break a couple bales up and go, well, it looks pretty good. So let me start sharing this again.
Well, and that's also a good point. For hay producers, it depends on what market they're selling into. And I know that's coming up in your presentation. Don't want to jump ahead, Scott, but
that's all right.
We got producers here in Wyoming that are selling to East Coast, Florida, Carolinas, and that for quality horse hay. And people, just like Scott was saying earlier, we produce high quality hay, and people know it, and they will come get it. But they're selling $200, $300, per ton of hay, but they're pulling off hay bales that have any color discoloration on that bale, because they are selling to a premium market, and that's not what they want to see.
A lot of times the hay is contracted out in our area to go to places like Pennsylvania. So it goes all over the place.
And they're trying to stand up the international market as well, right, Scott?
Correct. And in fact, we have a 17-year-old producer that won the international hay contest last year from Natrona County. So that hay has competed against 50 other countries back there at the National Dairy Show, which, I mean, we're very representative of good hay. So I also work with a producer who's a neighbor who generates about 1,000 tons a year. And I usually buy some from him, high quality mountain meadow horse hay in big square bales. And I call him early and pay him early. The rest of it goes to Kentucky every year.
Wow.
So let's talk about some of the things in test. I mean, we encourage people to test. Good producers often will test their cuttings and have a copy that you can look at. And Jeremiah and Jeff, you can help with this. You'll see a lot of things on test, everything from digestibility, but the ones we really look at quickly is relative feed value, relative forage quality, and protein. You guys agree with that?
Yeah, and those are an actual number.
They are, and it gives you a number that once you learn it, you can kind of say, well, I'm willing to buy this kind of hay at the right price. But relative feed value estimates calculate digestible dry matter, and it uses it with an acid reaction, and then it multiplies that by how much an animal normally eats during the day, dry matter intake. For instance, a lot of horses and cattle eat about 3% of their body weight every day. And it varies a little bit if they're in a reproduction cycle or if they're growing or if they're on a maintenance schedule and they're aged or something like that. But these things range from 40 on a relative feed value of that was 3-year-old weathered grass hay up to 220 to 2. We actually had some at State Fair last year in Wyoming that was 256. Amazing hay.
So what you're trying to tell us is that the higher the number for relative feed value, the better it would be.
Stronger the nutrient value. Yep.
Okay.
Now, do you want to buy that? I don't know.
Depends on what you're feeding, right?
Yeah. I mean, for my old geldings, I can get by with 150. If I was going to be producing running a milk cow, I'd want that 225 and up because I get more milk out of it. Relative forage quality is related, but it's calculated differently, used for total digestible nutrients. So they evaluate using all the factors, including that one that Jeff mentioned, the lignin content, cellulose, hemicellulose, and things like that. And the people who are running high-end hay for high-demand animals, race horses and dairy cows, they tend to use the RFQ, the relative feed quality, as an indicator for forage performance rather than relative feed value. But in my experience, and this is just my experience, most of the producers in the West, from Montana to New Mexico, relate to relative feed value. It's a number they get used to. As Jeff mentioned earlier, you could have a caramelized or a moisture burned hay that, or as Jeremiah mentioned, something with a weed in it that's really high in protein, but is not very digestible. And that's the reason we don't use just protein. Any thoughts, guys?
No, I think that's just a good point. Usually with that forage analysis, there's a lot of numbers on there. It's not just these. There's dry matter, there's moisture, there's nutrients on there, depending on what feed analysis you get. But these are the ones that people really use to look at for the quality of hay, to assess it to what I want to buy, but also hay producers use it as a marketing tool as well to express the quality of hay that they have for sale. So just understand those numbers, but also what they pertain to.
Yep, and when we did it, we'd run about 2,000 to 2,500 ton a year, and we would market it based on the results. And then people could pick and choose, you know, I want that 200 quality hay for this much, and we just made a formula. It worked pretty well. Now, as far as testing, a lot, as Jeremiah said, a lot of producers test theirs and they're willing to share with you. But even if you buy a batch of hay and you want to know the nutrients your animals are getting, it only costs between $14 and $20 to run a core test, and your local extension agents can help you with that. And then send it in and get it back in 48 to 72 hours electronically, and know what you're feeding. And that's important. So types of hay and species, we'll talk a little bit. That nutrient need discussion leans over into different things, including different species, different animals in different stages of their life. Coriander roping steers don't need near the quality of hay that fat beef steers do. And in the process, I had one producer said that, you know, I trained my roping steers to go out and eat sagebrush and greasewood because that's all they really need. And I didn't agree with him, but it's a lot different than fat steers. Horses are the same way. There is a caution. We've got about 14 research studies over the last 10 years that show that alfalfa hay, legume hay specifically, isn't necessarily good for young horses and old horses, horses under 2 and over 13, because we fertilize that type of hay with phosphorus and potassium. And the phosphorus and potassium tend to bind up calcium in the diet. So when they use exclusively alfalfa hay, young horses tend to not grow as well. In fact, it can actually stunt as much as 12% of their growth. And old horses tend to develop osteoporosis when they're on just alfalfa. Horses evolved on grass, and it's what we encourage people to do, get a good grass hay or a grass alfalfa mix hay. The middle-aged horses, they can pretty much tolerate stuff, but just remember that calcium you're tying up is not being used for their body, so it's important.
It's always been surprising. Sorry, Scott. That's always been surprising to me in the horse world. You do run into those sector of people that, man, you know, Fluffy's going to get the best kind of hay, and that means they're cutting alfalfa, you know, and for at least to my understanding, my training, that's just not what a horse necessarily needs, depending on a lot of things. But our normal run-of-the-mill horses in the backyard, a good grass hay or a mixed hay would do them just fine.
So the catch to that is grass hay doesn't sell for as much. So the producers, to use their landscape more efficiently, tend to lean towards legume hay or legume mix hay because you get more dollars out of it. Now, there is a niche market, like the ones I work with, that are growing extremely good grass hay, and it's selling pretty close to alfalfa, but they're doing it specifically for horse people.
Yep.
And that's what we did for years on one field, and it got to the point where it'd be within $20 a ton of the alfalfa hay. Does not regrow as fast, so you don't get as many cuttings. So the dollars are still not there as big, but if you need help finding grass hay, contact our offices. We know a lot of producers. That's always a good way to do it. Excuse me. Reproductive and developing cycles. Young animals need other things, just like kids do. If an animal's in a reproductive cycle, their nutrient needs, the last trimester of gestation and the first half of the lactation cycle, they're going to need more nutrients. So you got to have a little better feed. You can either do it with supplements or buy better hay. Older animals that are not in production, you can put them on a maintenance diet that can be a lower end product and saves you money in the process. We run into the same issue with droughts. When we get hay that's impacted or rangelands that are impacted, you can feed lower end hay as long as you supplement to meet the nutrient needs of an animal. And the extension staff can help you assess the nutrient needs of your animals. And we have some great articles on Barnyards and Backyards about looking at what's needed for animals. So please look at that. We run into similar issues with annuals, mostly annual things. When annual forage producers plant a crop, it usually is in one cycle. And they may be looking at, if they get a drought, they may be looking at getting as much tonnage as they can. And examples are sorghum, Sudan grass, those two individually. You put them together, they call them products like Canex. And then they're a big stem that's kind of like, well, the same thing with corn. Corn is a grass technically, but it's got a big hollow stem. And when they want to knock it down and get as much off the field as they can, they run their swathers pretty low. If that crop had been either frost stressed or drought stressed, it has a tendency to rupture some of the cellular structure so that the cycle of moisture and protein and everything else can't go all the way through the plant. And nitrates and prussic acid tend to accumulate at the bottom foot of those products. If you get somebody that sells you Canex, which is a grass hay, and they cut it real low, you need to test it for nitrates at the very least. Nitrates create a situation where the hemoglobin's tied up in mammal system and they literally suffocate at a cellular level. You can lose livestock. Prussic acid is similar kind of impact, but a different chemical reaction. It can be tested for too. So anytime you're buying annual hay, whether it's oat hay or Canex or sorghum or Sudan grass or barley hay, something like that, it never hurts to test it to see if it has risk factors. Energy versus protein. You can get hay in dryland areas that has good protein, and when you analyze it on a test, it has almost no energy. So what you see is production losses from your livestock. You want to check that. This is the first step of looking at a nutrient balance assessment for your animals. And that's a whole nother subject, but it's worth checking into.
Well, and real quick on that, Scott, what you're talking about there of energy versus protein, energy is the carbohydrates essentially in that hay and forage, those sugars essentially. And then the protein, we know what protein is. So,
yeah, it's a delicate balance, but know what you're getting, test it out.
Yep.
So talk a little bit about hay formats. You got a preference, Jeremiah or Jeff?
We do small squares, just because we have horses, but also because I don't have the equipment to handle the big stuff.
Yeah, good point. We did small squares for years.
And large squares for us just because they're easier to handle and move.
You know, it's interesting. We were costing us about $29 a ton to put up small squares. And when we shifted to the 3x3x8s, my cost per ton of getting it in its stack dropped to $16. And the hay had less leaf loss. But it's important to know these types of hay because you'll see advertisements. And if you're not a hay aficionado, sometimes you don't quite understand. Round bales, the different sizes run from 1,400 to 2,200 pounds. So some of them will be a ton per bale. If you go out there with a motorcycle trailer to get 10 of them, you may be challenged. The squares come in 8-foot lengths normally. They're close to 8 foot, the big squares, 3x3x8, 3x4x8, and 4x4x8. The 3x3x8, 750 to 810 pounds. Now all of these will lose some weight as they dry out. The 3x4x8's 900 to 1100, and the 4x4x8s, you'll hear all kinds of claims, but normally 1,400 to 2,200 pounds, depending on the tension that they put on them. And the small squares, 50 to 90. Whether you're buying big ones, round ones, or small squares, it's important to assess the weight of them, because if you're buying by the ton and they tell you, well, there's 30 bales per ton, and you go out there and they're 45 pounds a piece, 30 bales at 45 pounds is not going to be a ton. However, it may meet your needs, but you can dig your prices. Some of the older places have stack wagons that generate an 8 to 11 ton stack. And if they live close to you, some of them will trot that stack right over and sell it to you. And they back it into a yard and you just feed loose hay off of it, and it works really well. Loose hay still in some areas. In some ways, loose hay tends to resist heavy snow loading better than some other things. And yet it takes an art and a science to put it up and to feed it. And you don't move it around much. There are some stack movers, but not as many as the other things. The nice part about the 8-foot bales, the 3x3 up to 4x4 is, well, I'll give you an example. Small bales used to take 4.5 hours for me and 2 teenage boys to load a semi. Where one guy with a front end loader can load a 3x3x8 semi in about an hour. And when you tie down the square bales, they're a lot cleaner to haul. They're more balanced on a semi load or a pickup even, and they haul neater. When we switched from small squares to 3x3x8s, all of our horse clients were upset. And we finally showed them that I can stack 2 of those in the back of a pickup between the wheel wells. You get to the house, tie a hay hook on one and tie it to the post and drive out from under it. And they liked the quality of the 3x3x8s better than the smalls because it was consistent, didn't lose a lot of leaf. Everything was in there, and it was just a clean haul. It was easier. Thoughts on hay formats, gentlemen?
Really just depends on your situation, how much you need at a time and how you want to handle it, and if you have equipment to do it.
It does. It does. And I find myself having sold most of my hay equipment. When I buy big bales, I run into town and I rent a skid loader. And so I add another $150 a season onto my hay cost. But I like the big bales quite a bit. So hay market prices vary a lot. I was going to ask Jeremiah and Jeff what you're seeing for prices. We're seeing prices run from 180, 160 up to 200 per ton.
We flow pretty consistently here in the Northwest. You know, we're just getting first cutting is being marketed. And so that first cutting hay this year is sitting around $140, $150 a ton up. You might, I know of some hay that's $120, $130 a ton, but it's not marketed. It's not publicly marketed. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Do we have notes in the box? I can't see it.
Yeah, we just had a note from Julie Daniels about she liked medium squares, and I think it's just easier for her to handle.
Yeah, you know.
Thank you, Julie.
Years ago, Julie's point's well taken. I had a lady come to me when I ran a hay farm in Colorado and asked me to make lady bales. So this
lady bales.
Lady bales. When I was doing the small squares, she said that she wanted me to cut them in thirds, you know, and make like 20-pound bales. And I did. I put up 3 tons. I'd never heard my baler scream so loud because time you turned the knotters and the timers down, it was tying a bale about every 20 seconds. The other part was when we realized our bale wagon wouldn't pick them up. And then third part was they won't stay in a stack worth a darn, but she loved them. And I charged her twice the price and she loved them. There's niche markets out there like that where she had one horse. She picked up one 16 by 16 by 16 bale and fed it to it. It was good for the day. And there are markets out there like that. The equipment is not really designed to do that. But I think I wore out 3 sets of knotters on 2 tons of hay. But
oh, man.
It's a whole nother issue.
Sorry, guys. Julie also wrote on Facebook that hay is $200 to $300 a ton in southeastern Wyoming. I don't think we're that high in Torrington area.
Yeah, it's running about 200 around Casper, but there are some options. Prices vary depending on the area. If you live in the middle of a bunch of hay farms, it's going to be cheaper. If the number of buyers is pretty small and there's no market that way, it's going to be probably drop because the guys are going to be looking to sell the hay. If you've got a lot of hay buyers, it's going to climb up. Types of hay makes a difference. If you're looking for grass hay, as Jeff and I mentioned, good quality grass hay is a little harder to find. So you may have to pay a little bit more or pay to haul it. We'll talk about that. The amount with precept we get each year changes the market. The amount of demand from the livestock industry changes the market. If we get a good green year where everybody gets a lot of moisture and the hay grows a lot, they're getting more tonnage, it tends to reduce the price of the hay. But if you have a producer that has a great reputation for clean, beautiful hay that's reasonable to deal with, you may find that they get popular and the hay goes up a little bit, but it's usually worth it. Jeff, you want to address pre-ordering versus late buy?
Jeff, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I was muted. Get your order in now. Think ahead, plan ahead, right?
Yeah. If hay gets really short because everybody's bought what's out there, what you can find is going to be expensive. And it's just the way it goes. It's just like buying fancy Corvettes. There's only 2 on the market left. They're going to be pretty pricey. The last but not least in this slide is, well, I shouldn't say that. There's one more thing, but you can get impacts. And this photo in the right-hand side is like that. This is actually my hay field. Hay was baled, ready to turn it, and we had a rainstorm and a flood. And as you can see, there's water standing in the field around my bales. The worst part was it took about a week to dry out enough that I could get a bale wagon out there to pick them up. So that hay was far from being good by the time we got done. In fact, when we were selling those bales at $6 a piece, you can count the spots out there and pretty much just see how much money we lost. And that's what happened. So the next cutting came in really good. And of course, we raised the price a little bit to try to compensate for the impacts, and that happens.
Julie also put in there that down around the Fort Collins area, the horse market really likes 40 to 50 pound bales. So yeah, it really depends on what the market is, what you're trying to target with that. And like Scott talked about, of making that bale or making that product fit that market. That also plays a part.
So one of the questions I get periodically from people wanting to look for hay is, should I haul hay or not? Should I pay for it? And in my area right now, haulers are charging about $5 to $8 a loaded mile. So they load a truck or a trailer or semi, and they'll charge you so much a mile for a loaded mile. And then they'll charge you per ton to load it and to unload it. So you go out and buy that and you weigh that against doing it yourself. It's just numbers game. You got to figure out if you can beg, borrow, steal somebody to help you. It's usually worth the effort to get access to equipment. That means either buying it, renting it, or borrowing it. And sometimes it works out. It does require some labor. And if you have health issues or anything like that, remember there's roughly 30 to 32 tons of small bales per ton. If you're going out to buy 3 tons, you're going to be doing loading. And the beauty of loading small bales is you get to load them twice, sometimes 3 times. You get to load them on, load them off, and then you get to stack them. There are some producers. Yeah. We do have some producers that have bale grabbers that'll load your trailer for you, and they'll grab 20 bales in a flat and load the trailer. And the downside is when you get home, you get to unload them by hand usually, and then stack them under something that keeps them out of the weather if you're working at it aggressively. And so there is some labor involved, and you got to be careful of your health issues and your access. Buying and moving larger amounts is less expensive, but it does come with some built-in cost. Hauling hay builds character, not marriages. That's one of the things my wife said to put in there. She can tell you stories about things that do not go right or that got to be dissentious during moving hay. And my wife is one of the best hay marketers I've ever met. But at the same time, she will not put tarps on haystacks with me anymore. That's a long story. I'll tell it to you some other time. But I couldn't see that she was flying at the end of the tarp. I was at the other end of the stack. It wasn't my fault. So these pictures kind of demonstrate some simple approaches and a couple problems.
And some individuals having some really bad days.
Yeah, front end loader loading hay on a flatbed is pretty easy. We see a lot of people going to pick up 2 squares. If you got a producer who will hold your stack for you, that works. The bottom left picture, this is not uncommon. Big squares tend to raise your center of gravity. You'll see the pickup in the back has got small squares down in the box, not having any problem traveling across the snow. The one with the big bale on top got a little over to the side, and the center of gravity took him right into borrow beds. It's not unusual, but it does build character. The bottom right is one of those issues that somebody bought 21 tons of hay and Something went wrong with a muffler on the semi that was hauling it, and the 21 tons of hay went up in smoke. The nice part is that commercial truckers usually have insurance that covers stuff like that, but you still got to find more hay. And it is scary. It is scary. Storage of hay. I like to keep it tarped or under cover after I get it in because I like to maintain the nutrient quality. It's maintained by handling it, putting it up properly, and storing it properly at both ends, the producer and the buyer. I grew up stacking tight stacks of 1,000 to 2,000 bales and been taught exactly how to put the bottom tier and the top tier to maintain weather resistance, and you can do it. But there's a little science to it and a lot of practice. The picture on the left is up by Bondurant, an operation up there that still puts their hay up by horse. They do it partially because those meadows are really soft. They do it partially because they've been doing it for 4 generations and they kind of maintain the culture. It takes a buck rake, it takes a horse-drawn mower, and then it takes a skid rake that drops it up to a stack, and then a drop grapple, another horse that's stacked that knows exactly what he's doing. It is a big operation, and if rain catches you, it's a little looser hay, so you have a tendency to have bigger problems, but this is the old school way. Protection from rain and snow is pretty important. When the hay drops, let's say your hay drops from 200 to 140 relative feed value, you're just wasted dollars. So tarps are darn sure worth it. I don't know if you have the money to put up a building, but hay tarps are worth the money if you buy good quality hay. If you buy old hay, it can become straw after about 12 months of bad weather. Plan, buy, and store enough for the needs of the animal when it's nice. I encourage people to buy and move hay between now and the 1st October. That way you don't deal with driving through the snow like that last picture, and you can take your time, put it up neatly, see what you're doing, and haul it during the daytime.
That's what we like to do. We buy all that we need for the year for the animals at one time, and then we haul it this fall and then stack it up, and we're good to go. And it's paid out, especially in the wintertime. There are people around here up in the Northwest that they buy a ton at a time, so to speak. But it was probably 3 years back now when we had that pretty good winter, and it was hard to get hay into those people. And there was some rescue operations to try and get some hay into their animals and things like that. So there's pros and cons to it, but you got to have the room to stack it and handle it. And it's a lot to move at one time, but it's worth it. At least to me. I don't have to do it in a snowstorm. So
yeah, and you want to make sure you stack it on an area that's not going to get saturated in water, or that the snow's going to blow in and block your access.
Right.
So store it high and dry. And
Scott, speaking of that, do you have any cautionary advice about avoiding spontaneous combustion in your stack?
Sure.
Because it does happen, particularly before it's been shipped, it can happen. I'm just curious to know if people, when they buy it, if that's something that they think about as well.
So my grandmother would tell you, if you have a hay that spontaneously combusts, you go find the producer and you slap him. Because normally the spontaneous combustion is a result of heat generated from a chemical reaction from too much moisture in the hay. So if they're putting it up dry enough and stacking it appropriately, you very rarely have spontaneously combusting stacks.
Right.
When you get a stack that's stacked and it has moisture in the middle, and that chemical reaction, it's an anaerobic chemical reaction, starts and it generates heat. Then the minute it gets air, you got a stack on fire. And the really only option you can do is go in with a front end loader and just destroy that stack and try to save as many bales as you can, let them dry out. But the first step of avoiding that is to put hay up at the right moisture level and then stack it dry. And if you do have an issue where you're buying pretty moisture hay, which those lab tests will tell you if you have a high moisture hay, you need to stack it in smaller parcels so that you can save one or sabotage one and move it, skid it aside while the others are still safe.
Yeah.
What are the levels? So if I'm looking at my analysis, Scott, what moisture level do I need to be concerned at?
When you get it in a stack of hay or in a bale, normally if it's by the time it's put up and you buy it, if it's over 13-14%, you got an issue. Because usually at the most we'll put it up at 18 and let it dry. By the time it goes in the stack, it dries out some. But on the drier hay, like big bales, usually it's 8 to 11 when it's going into the baler. So, but if you get something that's up to that, and the interesting part is usually when we have real wet hay that self-combusts like that, and that's traumatic, it's scary. You will also have hay that you can smell reactions happening in that haystack before it starts generating enough heat to catch fire. So normally, just as a general thing, what I've seen, people put up hay that they put it up in June or something, they put it in a nice tight stack that's almost airtight. Then about late July or early August, somebody sees smoke coming off the stack. Never hurts to go check your stacks, smell them, walk around them, see if you can tell. You can feel the heat coming off of them, literally. If you put your hand in the cracks, between the bales, you can feel the heat. You may just restack it, open it up, air it out, let it dry some more. Now be real careful. If you pop it open and it's gone far enough, nothing like a little oxygen in the flame, it's like gets to be like a fusee. It just goes.
Yep.
Have some help available.
And those large stacks will burn for days.
Yeah, I've seen a guy lose about 121 tons because it was distant from his operation, didn't know it was going until the fire truck went back and called because they saw the smoke plume, thought it was a range fire. So by the time they got down there, the core of the stack was on fire, and that was about it. I mean, and that's a lot of money.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if you have any questions, usually your extension offices, their ag and range producers, or range extension educators can give you pointers. We have some online stuff with Barnyards and Backyards, some good articles on putting stuff up. Take a look at them. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to call us and ask. So a couple of myths I wanted to talk about. We talked about one a little bit. Horses need alfalfa. Not always true, right? This year's hay is better than last year's hay. Well, I'll determine that once you look at both of them. The one we used to get during droughts is it ever pays to haul hay very far. Well, if you haul hay 50 miles, that's really worth $50 a ton, and you can get something for $150 a ton 200 miles away that's 5 times the quality of hay, maybe it does. We actually have access, thanks to University of Nebraska, to a spreadsheet called the feed cost calculator that can use your test results, plug in the distance, plug in it, and it'll actually give you a price cost per pound of protein delivered to the mouth of your animal. And it's freeware. All you got to do is holler and we can share it with you. That's an easy thing to do. Before you go and buy it, if you're debating on whether to haul or not, crunch the numbers. We can help you crunch them. Jeff, you have been an organic producer on several crops. Is organic hay better?
No, I've never been an organic producer. So
I thought you guys had produce.
Better.
Sorry, I thought you had produce that was organic one time. At any rate, organic hay, it has no additives and no herbicides and pesticides. And the reality is sometimes we need to keep weeds out and really dangerous insects out of a hay. They don't qualify as organic. Now, weed-free hay, on the other hand, which is certified by a process with the Department of Ag and your local weed and pest district, weed-free hay is a good thing, and it's what's required if you're going on to the national forest. So you can check, and your weed and pest district locally can tell you who has certified hay weed-free. And it either comes showing a certificate or it comes in some states with a special twine color. But you can verify that they double-checked it before it was harvested to make sure there was a minimum amount of weeds in it, and that's pretty handy.
And organic hay is not weed-free hay. Those are totally different hays. Just because you're getting organic hay does not mean that there's not something bad in there, or that is the highest quality of hay, or that. You really got to know what you're buying. Talk to that producer. What is it? Organic can be of benefit. I hear of it a lot in like a dairy operation. So that can be a benefit for that market, but you still just need to know what kind of hay you're getting.
Absolutely. And remember, chunks of manure are also technically organic.
Well, and the other part of that too, Scott, is it has to be, in order for somebody to say that it's organic, it has to be certified organic. You can't just say that it's organic. So
yeah. Do we have any comments, or? I mean,
got a quick question here off of Facebook. Julie Daniels asked again, we've considered getting a moisture meter for our clients to use when checking hay, both to prevent fire and mold. Do you have any thoughts on those moisture meters?
I use them when I hay all the time. I use one in the windrows. I use one in bales. If I put something up wet, I use them. Yeah, and I have one at our office. It's mine, but it's important for a producer to be using them. And most of the producers, a lot of them either have them built onto the baler. A lot of them are built and integrated into the baler to show them the moisture level. And they check them. I had one lady call me and said, "Why is that guy baling?" He'd stop every once in a while. What he was doing is checking his tension and checking his moisture levels. Most producers know what moisture they put them up at. But it never hurts you to have access to something like that. They're not expensive. It's a long probe, drives in, and you could use them for hay in the windrow. You could use them for grain. You can use them for hay and make sure that it's not getting wet. And if you're storing grain and stuff in a bin, that's important too, rather than letting it ferment. Use a moisture meter and check it. But the other part is you can just find someone that has someone like a producer and borrow it once in a while.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, they are. They're handy. We used to do it because we wanted a consistently certain weighted bale, and the only way to do that was to have a consistent moisture rate. So other myths. Timothy is best for horses. I addressed that a little bit. Horses love it. It is high energy. It has a lot of sugar in it. It's real tall stems, low leaf percentage. But if you're swathing it, it's like you're surfing. I mean, you go along and it just cuts like butter in front of your swather. The downside is once it cures and put it in a windrow and put it in a bale, I've never found Timothy with more than 5.5% protein. They love it, but they can get really skinny on eating just Timothy hay. So it's important to know the actual truth and balance of the nutrients.
And that's a good myth out there, because that's part of that horse world again, is that like Timothy hay is the only horse hay you should buy. That only Timothy hay can be horse hay. And
careful, Jeremiah, you're going to get a frowny face.
Get a frowny face? I'm trying to raise my level to Barton, you know. But it's just, Timothy does make good hay. It can be fed to horses. It's good quality hay, but it's not the only hay out there, especially grass hay, that can be fed to horses.
Yeah, and if it's in a mix, it works real well.
Right.
It doesn't persist in a mix, and it doesn't persist if you graze those fields, because it dies out. A lot of mountain meadows have it. They put it in, and it's great. It does have a market, but you better be checking your horse's nutrient requirements and giving them other supplements if you're just feeding Timothy. And if you buy Timothy in bulk, run a test on it. See what I'm saying? It's not as good a hay total as a lot of hays are. So any hay is worth buying. That's another myth, especially during droughts. Well, I went out there and this old 6-year-old stuff stacked along the fence, and it may end up being more costly to haul it than it's worth for nutrient values. Do your homework.
Yeah, but it makes really good compost at that time.
You want some? We got a stack of old moldy stuff that the wife's using to bed plants on. You're welcome to come get a ton if you'd like. The other thing is people call and say, well, I can't find any hay. And we do recognize the fact that hay producers are in an agricultural social circle, and they don't always interact with some of our horse and small animal enthusiasts, but they do interact with extension educators on a regular basis. And We teach them pesticide classes. We teach them other things. And often it's not, they're calling us for technical advice from time to time. And our families interact with them. So if you can't find hay, call your local extension office or your weed and pest district, somebody that interacts with ag producers, and they can usually feed you some people. Even if we can't give their name and number to you, we can text it to them and say, hey, this guy's looking for hay. They can call you. That's not a big deal.
Yep. Well, and also there's a hay and forage association in the state, and they list hay out there for people. So, you know, just do a Google search, Wyoming Hay and Forage Association, and you can find that too, and might be able to find some hay close to you or within the state.
Yep. And those of us who run hay shows and contests, we know where the best hay is because we judge it every year. So you may pay me more for it, but it's good stuff. So special considerations, drought years and pest risk. In drought years, sometimes people let their alfalfa hay or sandfoin or bird's foot trefoil grow to more bloom simply because they're worried they won't get the yield that they usually do. And they're right. Downside is when those flowers form, it draws things like, it draws blister beetles because they're hunting those larvae that were put in there by alfalfa weevils who lay their eggs in the flowers. And the grasshoppers also go after the larvae of the alfalfa weevils. So you'll find a lot more insect issues on drought years normally. Imported or unusual hay, we mentioned. Hay and poison quality risk. One of the top 4 rodeo contract companies in the West called me once and said, I've got horses sick and dying, and he'd bought hay out of Kansas. He had me literally drive 20,000 acres on an ATV looking for the toxic plants that I dealt with to find out what his horses were eating that killed him. And it ended up, when we opened the bales up, that he was feeding round bales of hay from Kansas. They were just saturated with showy milkweed, which at about a 2.5% to 3% of body weight intake is fatal to horses. Know what you're buying. If you're buying something from a distance, do your homework, open it up. Jeff mentioned a little bit about fermenting and side effects. I love this because of what it does, but it actually can add some nutrient value, and it adds some side effects. Have you guys ever seen the old movie Rounders?
I don't think I have.
With Henry Fonda and those guys, they had a horse that would get into grain and always sought out grain that was fermenting. Oh. And then he'd get inebriated and kick at everybody. Quite the old movie, but it was all about fermenting grain and fermenting hay. So during bad years, you'll also find people selling hay that they're grinding, and they're willing to bring it in and grind it into a loose pile. 9 times out of 10, the reason they're grinding hay is they're mixing low quality hay with high quality hay, enough to balance things out. We actually have acceptable levels of things like nitrates and stuff. So if they had a hay crop that had nitrates in it, they'll take 1 bale of that, 2 bales of good hay, and the total percentage of parts per million of the toxins are reduced to a tolerable level for cattle. And you will find that happening, especially when we have tough years. Impacts on growth and reproduction, cattle, sheep, horses, goats can all be impacted both in breeding season, in gestation, and in lactation by poor quality feed. So know what you're doing. If you get an opportunity to come to one of our classes on nutrient cycling for livestock, it'll show you a lot about where their peak need is. It's just like with humans, the demand on their bodies is different at different times of the year. If they're down and getting poor feed in the breeding season, your breeding rates will drop off dramatically. If they have it during their late gestation, you may see or may even not see abortions that happen because animals trying to take care of themselves and can't afford to take care of the fetus. And not last but not least, if they're lactating and feeding a young animal, they're feeding for 2, so they're going to need more power to it. And if you don't give them the power, either the cow sacrifices or the mother sacrifices herself, or she sacrifices the young. Either way, you're going to lose money because she won't breed back as quick, and your weaning weights won't be near what you expected. Nutrients pay for themselves if you do it in a timely manner, I guess is my only consideration.
Sure.
So some ways we can help you, we mentioned them. We can give you access to growers, or at least put 2 and 2 together. We have lots of research on what animals need. We have some spreadsheets and cost sheets that you can download, or we can get to you, that will help you estimate cost, everything from hauling to baling to grazing, corn stover to other things. We have varieties trials on hay information. We have safety guidelines, bunches of reference material, how to grow hay, and a whole number of other things. And you can find them both by contacting your extension office, but we have hundreds of articles and videos and stuff on the Barnyards and Backyards system, which is part of what you're watching now. And in addition to the Jeremiah and Jeff show, or Jeremiah, Jeff, and Jenny show, which is what we're doing. There's a lot of resources on barnyardsandbackyards.com that come from a whole list of team members that have, for the last, I don't know, decade or so, have been putting out materials that is easy to read, easy to use, and it's right there available to you. Is that about it?
I think so, Scott. I think we've covered it. I don't see any questions for you, remaining questions. One thing, Jeff, you might need to highlight a little bit more on your background.
Yeah, so Scott, we've touched on this a little bit, but one of the hazards, I guess, of hay production is the introduction of foreign substances, and blister beetles are one of those. And this image is from Pat Porter from Texas A&M, and it's a collection of all the blister beetles, well, not all of them, but many of the blister beetles that they find in hay. And blister beetles are bad because their blood actually contains a product called cantharidin, which causes blisters in mouths of horses. And it only takes a portion of a single beetle in a bale to cause significant problems. So why are they there? They are attracted to the flowers. They consume the flowering parts of the plant. And but they're a beneficial insect in that their larvae are predators of grasshopper eggs. So when the grasshopper populations increase, then we start seeing more of these things in the alfalfa field. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. But if you can harvest your alfalfa early, Scott, you mentioned 10 to 30% bloom, I think, cut time. If you can actually harvest on that lower end, you should reduce the amount of blister beetles that you have. And then when you are cutting, if you know that they're there, don't crimp your alfalfa.
Yeah, I was going to add that, because we dealt with it for years, and we found that if our horse buyers knew it, we go out and float our head about another 2 inches higher than normal. We laid the windrow over and we left it an extra day. They will actually crawl out of the hay windrow once it's laid over. And then we took our crimpers off, because last thing you want to do is crush them into that hay.
Because then you don't know they're there. You really don't know they're there, but they can still cause the problem. So yeah, it's significant for horses. They don't cause that much of a problem for cattle, but I think in high enough numbers they probably could. But it's just one of those things. How do you best manage it, right? When we have years when we have really bad grasshoppers, people are concerned about them. Well, then these things start showing up too. So and don't pinch them. The cantharidin will actually burn you just like capsaicin will. Right. It'll form a blister on your skin. Yeah, it makes lesions in the horse's throat and in its mouth to where they'll go off feed, and there's actually a couple fact sheets out on what to watch for with livestock for blister beetle risk. And if you're into insect protein, don't eat them either.
No.
Yeah.
Definitely not one you want.
A little spicier than you thought would happen, but
right.
You know, the interesting part is for years we used Firadan to treat for for alfalfa weevils on fields. And one year the pilot that I used said, you know, you got to wait a week after we spray to be able to harvest your field with Furadan. I said, yeah. I said, well, there's a new product out, and I'm not even sure this is on the market anymore, called Warrior. And so we started spraying with that, and it killed the blister beetles, but it did something else too. I'd cover my beehives for 2 days and heat spray, and then it killed the mosquitoes. And it was like life-changing for an irrigator. I mean, when you're growing 200 acres alfalfa and watering it every day, it is like mosquito heaven along the riverside. And when he sprayed those mosquitoes, we'd get through 2.5 cuttings with no mosquitoes.
Yeah, I think Warrior is cypermethrin, so it's a pyrethroid. It still is available. Yeah.
But, you know, look around, and if you're looking at something like that, find out what producers are using and how they're producing hay and what challenges they're facing. And that can help you. You can help them by telling them, look, I'm looking for horse fade, so I don't want any blister beetles. And they can help you by doing a little better maintenance and management.
Yeah. Yep, that the relationships just goes a long ways on that. So, yeah. Great. Well, thanks so much again, Scott. Thank you for all the information. What a wonderful show. I don't see any other remaining questions, so we'll just wrap it up here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us and participating, as always. So this is the Barnyards Backyards live show. Like Scott said, we have a plethora of information for you on the Barnyards and Backyards website. Go to that URL. If you want to see future shows, what the list is, what we have coming up, we have that list on there as well. But also we have the recorded shows like this one. We'll edit it slightly, throw it up there on, so you can go back and watch it again if you need, or share it out. We also have those links. And Jenny showed you both sides of that, of where you can find the materials. But if you got questions, if you can't find it or navigate it, let us know. We'll get you to it. Also, reach out to the county extension offices. Scott highlighted that a lot. We have a lot of resources to help people. That's what we're here for. And so go to this URL, uwyo.edu/UWE. So, and reach out. We have an extension office in every county and one on the Wind River Indian Reservation. So we have one near you. So reach out and let us help you. The last thing that we'll highlight is, Jeff mentioned at the beginning of the show, we have an evaluation. We want to hear from you. That feedback really helps us steer this show and know what is beneficial to you and help provide detailed information for you. So if you can take a few minutes, Jenny's thrown that up in the comments section. Here on, or excuse me, out on Facebook Live, and then here on Zoom, it's in the chat box as well. If you're on Zoom, when you close out, you'll be prompted in an internet browser for that same evaluation. Really short, simple. It's 5 questions. It won't take you much time at all. So anyway, with that, thank you again, Scott. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to all our participants, and have a great Friday and a great weekend.
Thanks, Scott.